Welcome to Bookpods. Imagine doing literally all the heavy lifting in a group project, right? And
Hmm.
everyone else just criticizes your methods, they contribute absolutely nothing, but they still completely expect an A off your sweat.
Oh, man. Yeah, the absolute worst. We've all been there.
Right. So, now scale that exact dynamic up to the size of the entire global economy. Because that is the explosive premise we're unpacking today. We are doing a deep dive into the source material surrounding Ayn Rand's really monumental and highly controversial 1957 novel, Atlas Shrugged.
Yeah, and we've got a massive stack of stuff to work off today, like
Yeah.
comprehensive book summaries, transcripts of her speeches, historical breakdowns. It's a lot.
It really is. So, our mission today is to essentially decode this gripping dystopian narrative, right? And really understand Rand's philosophy of objectivism. Like, we want to get into the mechanics of why this book continues to violently divide readers almost 70 years after it came out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because, whether you're trying to understand the roots of modern libertarian thought, or honestly, if you've just ever felt that frustration of carrying dead weight in your own life, this text presents some incredibly provocative ideas, specifically about the morality of self-interest and, well, the dangers of government overreach.
For sure. But before we actually pull the narrative apart, we really need to lay down the ground rules for today's analysis because Atlas Shrugged is a supercharged political and economic text. Like it heavily influences modern conservative thought.
Oh, completely. It's an uncompromising defense of free market capitalism. So we need to be clear that we are here strictly as impartial guides.
Right.
We're just exploring the ideas contained in Rand's writing to understand, what she was arguing and why it has such a massive legacy. We were absolutely neither endorsing nor condemning her worldview, just dissecting the source material.
Definitely. So just diving right in, Rand doesn't just drop us into a generic dystopia. She paints this vivid picture of the United States in like active, agonizing collapse.
Yeah, a real bureaucratic decay.
Exactly. Infrastructure is crumbling, the power grid is failing, and factories are just closing down because of these arbitrary quotas. And the government is basically suffocating any kind of innovation with draconian regulations.
Right, and we see all of this through the eyes of Dagny Taggart. She's the brilliant vice president of operations at Taggart Transcontinental Railroad.
She is basically trying to single-handedly keep her family's company alive,
Yeah.
and the roadblocks aren't even coming from competitors, which is the crazy part. They're coming straight from Washington.
Yeah, exactly. And she eventually finds an ally in this guy, Hank Reardon. He's a self-made steel magnate, and he just invented this revolutionary new alloy called Reardon metal.
Right, which is supposed to be like stronger and lighter than steel. It would completely transform the transportation industry.
You'd think a decaying society would be thrilled, right?
You would. But instead, society in this novel literally fears and resents his innovation. His competitors just lobby the government to restrict how much of this metal he can even produce.
They actually argue that it's unfair that his product is so superior.
Which is just wild to think about. It's like going back to that group project analogy. It's like Dagny and Hank are the only two competent people left, and instead of thanking them, the rest of the group is actively penalizing them for trying to get an A.
That's a perfect way to look at it. And that brings us to Rand's core theme here, this concept of what she calls the prime movers.
The creator.
That's right. The inventors, the industrialists, the thinkers. Rand argues that these people are the engine of the world. And, reading through the source material, what really stands out is that Rand isn't just defending capitalism because it's like an efficient economic engine.
Right. She goes way further than that.
She argues that capitalism is the only moral system, period.
Which is a huge distinction because in her framework, it's moral because it's based on voluntary exchange. It actually rewards human intellect and competence.
Exactly. Because to Rand, the mind is a person's only tool of survival. So a system based on voluntary exchange
Yeah.
is the only one that lets the mind function freely without, arbitrary constraints or physical force.
Okay, so if Dagny and Hank are these brilliant, unstoppable prime movers, right? The natural question is, how on earth are they losing?
That's the kicker.
Because the villains in this book are not criminal masterminds plotting to take over the world. They're literally bureaucrats, dependents, and in some cases, family members.
Yeah, the antagonists are incredibly mundane, which makes them scarier in a way. Like Dagny's brother, James Taggart. He's the president of the railroad on paper, but he keeps his position through backroom deals and government favors. He's actively sabotaging his own sister's efforts to run the trains.
He's the embodiment of crony capitalism, which Rand despised just as much as socialism, by the way. But the interpersonal stuff is almost more insidious, like Lillian Reardon, Hank's wife.
Oh, she is fascinating, because her weapon against Hank isn't a law or regulation. It's pure envy. She weaponizes his own virtues against him. She just wants him to feel guilty purely for being successful.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate here for a second, because to a modern reader, this whole setup can feel incredibly harsh. Like, characters who ask for help or rely on charity, they are framed in a deeply negative light.
Very negative.
Right, so I have to ask, is there literally zero room for basic human compassion in her worldview? Because rejecting government mandates is one thing, but completely rejecting the concept of charity makes a lot of readers super uncomfortable.
Well, and that discomfort is totally intentional.
Oh.
But to really understand it, we have to look at Rand's very specific definition of altruism.
Okay.
She isn't talking about, tossing a few bucks to a neighbor or helping someone in an emergency. In her philosophical dictionary, altruism is this ethical doctrine that claims an individual has no right to exist for their own sake.
Oh, wow.
Right. It's the idea that service to others is the absolute only moral justification for your existence. She views that systemic demand, that you must sacrifice yourself for the collective good, as tyranny.
I see. So if society is essentially saying you owe them your labor just because you are capable and they are in need, you basically become a sacrificial animal.
Exactly. And you see that philosophy perfectly laid out by another character, Francisco d'Anconia. He's this brilliant industrialist. And there's this great moment where he's asked what the most depraved type of human being is.
Right, and he doesn't say a murderer or something like that.
No, he says, the man without a purpose. Rand argues that society uses what she calls unearned guilt as the leash. They expect people like Hank to literally apologize for their brilliance, to feel guilty because they produce more than everyone else.
The source text actually described this as a punishment that requires the victim's own virtue as fuel. Like, they are bleeding him dry by using his own sense of responsibility against him.
Yeah.
And, I mean, logically, if you push the smartest, most competent people to the breaking point by constantly punishing their success, eventually they're going to snap.
They really are. And that triggers the central mystery of the whole novel.
Right, because pushed to the brink, these prime movers just start vanishing. They disappear without a trace.
And as they disappear, the societal collapse just hits the gas pedal. Everything falls apart faster. And in the middle of all this despair, this haunting cultural catchphrase pops up. People just start sighing, "Who is John Galt?"
Yeah, it basically starts as a sigh of total despair, like saying, "What's the point?" Or "Where did everything go wrong?" But then Dagny actually investigates, and she realizes John Galt is a real person.
He is very real. He's this enigmatic inventor and philosopher, and he's orchestrating what he calls a strike of the mind.
A strike of the mind. I love that phrasing. It's like the ultimate apocalyptic version of quiet quitting.
Right, but way more extreme.
Way more extreme, because instead of just doing the bare minimum at work, the smartest people on Earth take their brains and literally hide them in a mountain.
They do. Galt basically travels the world for years, finding these prime movers and convincing them to stop producing. He basically shows them that the only way to end their exploitation is to withdraw their sanction.
To just stop voluntarily giving their talents to a society that hates them, but still demands the fruits of their labor.
Exactly.
The best analogy I could think of from the notes is it's like an engine where the spark plugs just decide to stop firing. Like all the heavy machinery, the factories, the government bureaucracy, it's all still there.
Yeah.
But without the spark of human ingenuity, it's completely useless.
It's just dead weight.
Yeah.
And so they all retreat to this hidden valley called Galt's Gulch, which is essentially a self-sustaining community that reflects Rand's absolute ideal society. They live completely unburdened by collectivist demands.
But wait, how does a society actually function without any concept of public infrastructure? Like, without collective funding, do they have roads? Do they have police?
Well, they do, but every single thing is privatized and voluntary. Like Midas Mulligan, who used to be a banker. He owns the land and leases it out.
Huh.
There's a judge who acts as an impartial arbiter if there are contract disputes. If you want a road, you pay the guy who builds the road. And they use a strict gold standard for currency. And the most fascinating detail is what Galt tells Dagny when she gets there. There is one word strictly forbidden in the entire valley. The word give.
The word give is forbidden. That is so intense.
Right. Every interaction has to be a trade. Value for value.
And that whole philosophy is literally chiseled into their defining oath. Every person in the valley has to swear it. The oath is, I swear by my life and the love of it that I will never live for the sake of another man, nor ask another man to live for mine.
And that second half is really the kicker. Because refusing to be a slave to others, sure, that's one thing. But refusing to make others a slave to you, that requires complete self-reliance. That is the essence of rational self-interest.
Right, meaning human relationships don't require a victim and a beneficiary. Everything is a voluntary trade between equals, whether you're trading gold for groceries or like affection for mutual respect.
Exactly. So meanwhile, as they are thriving in this little utopian valley, the outside world is literally tearing itself apart. I mean, without the producers, the collectivist society completely collapses into starvation and chaos.
Trains are derailing, crops are rotting in the fields, and in a total panic, the government implements Directive 10-289, which is this desperate measure that just freezes all wages, all prices, all jobs. It effectively turns the entire country into a slave state.
It's pitch black societal darkness. And that is exactly the moment John Galt finally steps up to the microphone.
Right. He hijacks a national radio broadcast to deliver this massive speech, like a 3-hour speech in the book.
Yeah, it's basically the manifesto for objectivism.
Yeah.
He starts at the very foundation of epistemology with the concept of A is A.
A is A.
Right. It's the philosophical law of identity. Existence is identity. Consciousness is identification.
Okay, but how does that abstract, philosophical law actually apply to the rotting crops and the failing economy?
Well, it connects directly to the villain's belief that they can legislate reality.
Yeah.
The government acts as though passing a law that mandates prosperity will just magically create wealth.
Regardless of whether anyone is actually mining copper or smelting steel.
Exactly. A means reality is absolute. You cannot fake reality. You can't just print paper money and pretend it represents physical goods that haven't actually been produced.
Right. Galt accuses society of practicing a willful suspension of consciousness. Like they're hoping if they just ignore the facts of economics, those facts will just disappear.
Oh, they don't.
They never do. So if A is A, wealth is wealth. You cannot divorce the effect from the cause. And the cause of wealth is human thought and production. Which ties directly into, I think, probably the most famous passage in the text.
Oh, Francisco's speech on money.
Yes, because you hear the phrase, money is the root of all evil, all the time in everyday life. But Francisco flips it completely and asks, have you ever asked what is the root of money?
It's such a brilliant flip, because he argues that money is just the material shape of principle, that if men want to deal with one another, they have to deal by trade.
Right.
It isn't the tool of the moochers who demand your product with tears, or the looters who take it by force. Money demands that you sell your talent to men's reason, not your weakness to their stupidity.
Wow.
And he says, until you discover that money is the root of all good, you are asking for your own destruction.
It's the ultimate code of competence, which actually brings us to the meaning of the book's title itself, because Francisco has this conversation with Hank where he asks him to imagine Atlas.
The mythic giant.
Exactly, the giant holding the heavy, bleeding world on his shoulders. And Francisco points out that the harder Atlas tries to hold it up, the heavier the world bears down on him, demanding more and more of his strength. And Francisco asks Hank, what would you tell him to do?
And the answer is just one word.
Shrug.
Shrug. Just let it fall. Stop supporting the very system that is actively crushing you.
It's such a powerful image. But logically, a government built entirely on force isn't just going to hear Galt's radio broadcasts and say, oh, our bad, we surrender.
No, of course not. They respond the only way they know how, with violence. They capture John Galt, and in this really darkly ironic climax, they attempt to physically torture him into saving their dying system.
It's insane. They literally demand he use his brilliant mind to fix the economy, and they try to extract his intellect using physical pain.
Which perfectly proves Rand's ultimate point. You can force a human body to do manual labor.
Yeah.
You can force someone to dig a ditch at gunpoint. But you cannot force a mind to think.
Right. You can't force someone to invent a new alloy under the threat of a car battery. It doesn't work.
It really doesn't. Galt refuses to grant his sanction. He absolutely will not help them.
So Dagny, Hank, and their allies launch this daring rescue mission. They infiltrate the compound, they save Galt, and as they are escaping in an airplane looking down at the world below, the collectivist regime just completely falls apart.
The lights of New York City literally go out. It signals the end of the looters' world.
And the novel concludes with the prime movers in Galt's Gulch basically preparing to return to the ruined world, to rebuild it entirely on their own terms, completely free from the shackles of unearned guilt.
It's a massive, epic resolution.
It really is. So, bringing it all together, what does this actually mean for us today? Let's synthesize everything we've covered in the source material. Atlas Shrugged is this passionate, completely unyielding defense of rational self-interest.
Yeah, it celebrates human innovation and acts as this really stark warning about prioritizing the collective over the creator.
It really forces you to examine the mechanics of cause and effect in the economy and in your own morality.
And that's exactly why Rand's work remains such a cornerstone of modern philosophical and economic debate. It refuses to compromise. It challenges you to re-examine the moral value you place on self-interest, the real nature of altruism, and the role of government.
Definitely. I mean, it's a book people very rarely feel neutral about. It either sparks intense admiration or just intense revulsion,
Yeah.
largely because it attacks premises that most of us just blindly take for granted.
Completely.
Which brings us all the way back to that group project analogy we talked about at the start, that
Yeah.
heavy feeling of carrying the load. I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, really lingering question to just mull over.
Oh, this is a good one.
Rand argues that the achievement of your own happiness is the absolute only moral purpose of your life. So imagine that for a second. If you stripped away every single obligation you feel you owe to society or to your community or even your family, what would your life actually look like?
Yeah.
And is a world where everyone lives entirely for their own rational self-interest a utopia of infinite progress and fair trade? Or is it a completely different kind of dystopia?
That's a question that requires some really deep, uncomfortable thought. And honestly, it's exactly why the ideas in this book are still so fiercely debated today.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this journey through one of the most polarizing texts of the 20th century. Keep questioning your premises, keep seeking value for value, and we will see you on the next deep dive into the source material.